Welcome everyone to Cornell Keynotes. Today we are joined by Swasti Pachauri, who is a policy and governance expert with experience in management consulting, academia, and the public sector. Swasti teaches both undergraduates and students in the Master of Public Administration program at the Cornell Brooks School here in Ithaca, New York. So I'm so pleased to have Swasti on Keynotes today. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you.
Viewers, thank you for joining us. We're going to need your participation in just a couple moments here. We may have already have that underway. I should mention that, all right, what's today's show about? Today we're going to be focusing our attention on Swasti's work with women in agriculture, also women-led small enterprises and craft-based livelihoods. And perhaps we'll all learn something here that may help us get creative and think outside the box as we pursue our own entrepreneurial journeys. Viewers, as mentioned, I do want you to be involved. A QR code will appear, and we're hoping you can anticipate in a poll question that we have to kick things off. We'll check out the results in just a few. I should also ask you to note that this is a live show right now. Again, we are taking your questions, but this event will be recorded, right? So afterward, several minutes after we're through, you can view the recording at the same URL. If you have to leave early or you'd like to share this with colleagues or friends, please share this. It's the same URL to view both the live show right now and the recording as well. Okay, Swasti, let's get into it. I find your history and experience super interesting. I want you to tell us how, set the table for us, how you came to work with women in agriculture, again, women-led small enterprises, people making livings around craft-based livelihoods that have been around for some time. Tell us about your work a little bit.
Sure. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much for this opportunity as well to be able to share my work and some of my knowledge. I hope it can benefit somebody, and I hope I also end up learning something in the process. So back in 2010, first of all, I was always fascinated with the world of crafts and handlooms and arts and artifacts and whatnot. And the credit for that goes to my mother. I used to visit all these handicrafts fairs with her in Delhi. And I used to be fascinated with different types of textiles and fabrics and whatnot. And this is what had me interested when I first visited one of the handicrafts fair back in 2010. I realized that some of these groups had traveled from far-flung places in India to Delhi, which is the capital of the country. And they were really trying to be entrepreneurial and trying to sell whatever produce they had got from their respective geographies and villages. And that's really the first time I thought of writing something about it. And then in 2012, I happened to join a government fellowship program, the Prime Minister's Rural Development Fellowship Program with the Government of India. And I was, I was placed in a rural district in one of the most beautiful states in the country, which is very close to my heart, the state of Madhya Pradesh. And that's where I first noticed, like the topic suggests, grassroots resilience, the resilience of these groups, the determination of these groups, the indigenous talents that these groups had. And I was working with a very, very vibrant district administration, district officials at that time, who really encouraged me to study these self-help groups in detail. And that's when I sort of produced a catalog in collaboration with my district administration and with their incessant support, which was titled Indigenous Talents. And that was really mapping all these self-help groups in that particular district and the different produce that these groups were making, how these women were engaging in it and so on. And I'd like to say that these crafts and these handlooms are very, very sustainable, right? So their livelihoods of these women are basically not just natural resource based, but also predominantly they contribute to agricultural economy. So this is how I started understanding the different, how is it that women's livelihoods prosper in agricultural societies? And that's what then led me to understand what is it that women in agriculture do. And if I could go back a little bit in time, in 2007, while I was pursuing my master's from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai, that's when I did a dissertation on the farmer suicides problem in the country. And that's when I first came across that, what challenges are women really facing in agriculture once farmers die by suicide? predominantly related to widows. And that's when my mind really started working back in the day as to what alternate livelihood opportunities could be provided to these women. So everything came together, and then I started writing about these things. 2012 is when I first wrote something on agriculture and women and self-help groups and women. And today we are. I've done my PhD also on women-based livelihoods. Basically, tried to understand the issue of farm suicides with a gendered lens, and I've been writing on self-help groups and forest and rural livelihoods since 2012. So that's what really my story looks like.
That's good. It's lovely to hear about your experience, because I was kind of thinking in my mind about the history of self-help groups. How long has this been going on? I mean, your involvement has gone on, dozens of years at this point.
Yeah.
Is this a relatively newish phenomenon to your knowledge, or is this something that extends much further than we can imagine?
Not really. I mean, if you look at the self-help group movement across the world, at least that's what I have read. I might be mistaken, but 1970s is really the time when the idea evolved. And in India, there's an organization called the Self Employed Women's Association. It's also known as SEVA. That sort of prospered in the 1970s. And if I could really remember, if I can remember correctly, the first formal self-help group really came in the 1980s. And the bank linkage program, and as we discuss how these women gather finances, how is it that financial inclusion has sort of resulted in the prosperity of these self-help groups. I could say that 1992 is when the self-help group bank linkage program came into place. And since then, it's been obviously evolving. But I would say in the last 10 years is when I've seen this phenomena really, really grow. And I say that with a place of a lot of, I've done a lot of field work. So I kind of have seen the way these groups have sort of come together and, the way their collective effort has been recognized. If I were to give you some statistics, there are around 12 million SHGs, at least that's what I read in 2023, and 88% of them are women-dominated groups. So not really new, but a long way to go still. So.
Yeah, I hope you forgive me. I talk in decades. I didn't presume that, I didn't mean to be presumptuous there.
Sure.
We kicked up a poll question for our audience to ask where they were. It looks like we had primarily a domestic audience that was paying attention at that moment, right? So we're looking at the results really quickly. This is almost entirely a domestic audience, which is kind of a surprise, right? We have people from such far-flung places as Long Island, New York, Durango, Colorado. Big up to Durango, Colorado. So not quite the international audience I had anticipated, but let's get a little bit more participation going on for this second one, because I think this is one we're really getting into it. I want to ask our viewers what they think is the most significant challenge that is faced by women entrepreneurs in rural areas who are working in the capacity you have described. We'll keep this poll going on in the background. We'll revisit the results in a minute, but I want you to share a little bit of insight into how rural women entrepreneurs are driving business, driving innovation, despite having what you would presume are limited access to resources.
Right. So like you said, that there's an international audience, and I'd rather begin with understanding what these self-help groups are. And very quickly, I'll just take you through what these groups look like, what their model looks like, and so on. So just the other day, I was watching this little video that was made by the Ministry of Rural Development, which is like really the parent agency of most of these self-help groups under the aegis of the Livelihoods program that's run in India. So the caption that video said was from beneficiaries to the drivers of rural economy. So I found that really fascinating, because it's really true that at one point in time, these self-help group women were beneficiaries of the governmental programs, right? The social welfare programs and so on, the rural employment schemes and so on, like the bank linkage program, like I talked about. And today, they're the real drivers of economic and social change. They're the real drivers of rural development and societal development. So what happens is that these are really small groups of people. Of course, there are SHGs that are men-dominated as well, but we are discussing women groups. So really 10 to 15 women come together, they pool in small financial, resources, they pool in some money, and then they begin having some business. And most of this is designed to sort of address to the challenge of the fact that rural poor face lack of collateral. So, which is why they've been excluded from formal banking systems. And therefore, these small groups of women coming together, lending to each other, saving small amounts of money for small businesses, sustainable businesses. This principle is predominantly dependent on collective economics, collective action, organic solidarity, which scholars like Emile Durkheim talked about. And primarily, the objective of these groups is to come out of the shackles of poverty, and which is why the video that I was watching, categorized these women as beneficiaries at some point and now the drivers of rural change. Like I said, some of the statistics that's there over here. And let's also talk about what are the challenges that these women or these self-help groups have fought over time. Because, like I said, that we are really talking about a rural society. We are talking about agricultural societies. Of course, the concept of self-help groups has evolved now, and we are really talking about urban livelihoods as well. We are talking about urban poor self-help groups as well, and also more formal self-help groups as well. But traditionally, the women members of these groups have fought challenges of, having so much of burden of work in terms of taking care of the households, doing agricultural work, rearing livestock, looking after the families, and so on. Poverty, malnutrition, iron deficiency, any lack of formal market training, any lack of formal managerial training for that matter, and also coexisting while there's hope and despair. Like I said, that mostly these women are employed in agricultural work. And I'd also like to say that around 60 to 80% of agricultural work in India is done by women. And you never know, right? With agriculture, you never know what kind of climate unpredictability, sort of what challenge it throws at you and so on, because the agricultural sector in itself is very, very rainfall dependent, and you just do not know how to survive in the wake of unpredictability. So there are these multiple challenges. And of course, there are these occupational stereotypes and familial norms and societal norms. There's patriarchy and whatnot. So I would say that this is really a revolutionary kind of model, which has fought immense social economic challenges, and yet these groups have sort of come together. To take to your other question of innovation, what are these innovative approaches? And if we were to really talk about what these groups do when they come together under one roof, what are they really doing? So, like you said, like we discussed, that these groups are coming from predominantly agricultural societies, and there are constraints of, there are constraints of economic resources, there are constraints of time, there's constraint of, access to capital and so on. While there are these constraints, these groups are still working with, different type of innovative approaches. And what are these innovations that they do? So they are always trying to balance ecology and economy, aesthetics, ecology and economy, using their indigenous talents and innate knowledge about entrepreneurship. I've always thought that the rural poor are the best entrepreneurs, as they constantly reinvent, reimagine, and innovate, especially in the constrained environments that they always live in. Always using principles of circular economy. Today we are talking about reduce, reuse, and recycle. We are talking about how business has to take into account the principles of sustainability. And here we have these groups without necessarily any managerial formal degree, and yet integrating the principles of sustainability, ecology, and also driving socio-economic change. Some of the most fascinating products I've seen these are just very few examples, and the deeper you go into it, you'd find more and more such examples. But ecology and sustainability is close to what I pursue in my career. So I'm taking most of these examples from that reference. But for example, if I were to tell you that these bags that you see on the slide, they're made from these water hyacinth weeds that are invasive. And one of the most unique business models that I thought, and I wrote about it first in 2019, was this that, this weed basically is invasive and it spreads in water bodies. And because of that, there's obviously some ecological damage and so on. So some of the district administrations, they came together and with these self-help groups and people. And what they did was they trained these self-help group members to kind of clean these water bodies and use the stems of these plants, water hyacinths, to make a fiber and then translate that fiber into these beautiful handicrafts. So these are just small bags that you see, but there's also furniture made out of this. There's also other kind of utility products that are made out of this. So we are really seeing a balance of ecology and economy. So, what I wrote at that time, and it was titled From Waste to Wonder, or, how do you harness ecological waste into wealth, you know? So this is one of the examples. The most favorite example that I often quote whenever we discuss in any forum about the resilience of these self-help groups is how most of these self-help groups, in the wake of the public health emergency that was posed by COVID-19, how most of these SHGs rose to the occasion and the challenge of COVID-19 to produce these absolutely gorgeous masks. You see that they are painted and there are these designs in these. So on the, one of the pictures here shows the traditional art form from the state of Bihar, which is called the Madhubani paintings. And Madhubani paintings are sort of very important in soft diplomatic efforts also between countries. Many a times, Madhubani paintings have been gifted to ambassadors and other political leaders that have visited the country. And they're really there on the global map of artifacts and handicrafts, just like other handicrafts and artworks from India. The other picture that you see has some kind of red embroidery, which is from the state of Assam. And this is again a heritage traditional art form. So what I'm trying to say is that in adversity, there was this, and we're really discussing grassroots resilience right now. So I'm trying to highlight how in adversity and in a public health emergency like COVID-19, most of these self-help groups, with the support of government and realizing that these are essential commodities of that time, started making face masks, which was catering to the needs of the market of that time and also conserving their heritage and tradition. So again, a very innovative way to kind of balance your tradition with modernity and also producing certain products that you needed with keeping aesthetics in mind. Then again, there are these God crafts, and I'm just going to quickly take you through this. And very interestingly, Christopher, if I can tell you, I saw these God crafts, and I was using these God crafts in one of my slides in last semester. And one of my students actually ended up telling me that, Professor, you must go to Godlandia in Ithaca and see these God crafts. And I was totally fascinated with the globalization of these handicrafts. And I met I met the owners of Godlandia, and they were also telling me exactly the same details that I've heard from artisans in India, and how they use these vegetables, these sponge gourds and pumpkins to make these fabulous lamps and fabulous art decor. So I believe, again, ecology and economy coming together and, sort of generating incomes and diversifying livelihoods is another fascinating example. And also it tells you the global cultural exchanges that happen from time to time and how everyone's working on very similar things and trying to address different concerns. And then if you have to say something.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, and the last, the other very fascinating thing I saw in the G20, G20 meetings were happening in 2023. And I kind of came across this really cool, very economical, and of course, ecological, this mobile phone stand, which you see, and the gap that you see in between, basically you keep your mobile phone in that. And the other thing that this little thing over here made out of bamboo does is that it sort of amplifies the sound. So this is like a natural, eco-friendly speaker that you see over here. And this was again one of the artisans I met in 2023 who was selling this in one of the handicrafts fair. told me that this product became very, very popular in the G20 meetings, and international delegates spot this. It was really cheap, very affordable, economical, and also, again, catering to balancing economy and ecology while also keeping the modern consumer tastes in mind. So this was, again, something very innovative, I thought, and very modern as well. So some of these innovative approaches is what I kind of tried to highlight through this.
Yeah, I'm hearing the through line in this, right? So what we see are entrepreneurial women entrepreneurs, right, in rural settings, meeting certain challenges by innovating out of them using, ultimately agrarian principles in many cases, which I think is totally fascinating. I want to go back to where we polled our audience really quickly and asked them what they thought were the particular challenges. It was lack of local business networks that emerged as number one. Limited access to capital and credit, inadequate infrastructure, cultural
Yes.
and societal kind of down there, and limited access to training or education. Are those the kind of
Yes.
results that you might have anticipated if you were to ask?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. When we
Good.
discuss challenges, you'd see that there's some resonance there. So,
Yeah, exactly. Good job, audience. Thank you for your participation. So, where does tech sit in all this? We haven't covered that yet. So, tell me a little bit about how these organizations, self-help groups, or how individual entrepreneurs use technology to drive their enterprises.
right. My favorite example of this, of course, I mean, there are these traditional examples, but my favorite example is the program or the scheme of Drone Sisters. Like I said, and like we discussed, most of these self-help groups are organized, and the government of India and the district administrations, they come up with schemes to kind of promote businesses of these women. And because they're also invested heavily in training these women and working on their capacity development, a lot of times these women are also trained as, say, local bank correspondents. So what is that program? That program basically is, female banker friends, where they get banking services to your doorstep, especially useful to households where somebody cannot possibly travel to a bank. We are really discussing rural distances here. We're discussing difficult terrains. So sometimes it's very difficult for an elderly or a differently able to go to the bank, and especially in the lack of any kind of private transport or sometimes even public transport. We also need to remember one very important nuance over here is that each time a rural poor household, somebody from a rural poor household has to travel long distances, it also means foregoing the income of that day. So, for example, if somebody is working as an agricultural laborer and she or she has to travel to a bank which is located in the city headquarters from a far-flung corner of their district or their state, they'll have to obviously forego the day's income. So it's very difficult sometimes for them to make that trade-off. And how do these groups then cater to that deficit? By becoming female banker friends or just banker friends, by taking up technology, and of course the government has sort of skilled these self-help group members with adequate knowledge, providing them with micro ATMs, devices, tablets, and so on, and train them in a manner that they can bring digital transactions to their doorsteps. I'd also like to tell you that this is also something that I have come across in my research and my work of the last 10, 11 years, is that I've seen that women have become very, very entrepreneurial when it comes to, using online transactions or online payments. Till several years ago, that was not the case. And this really tells you about inexpensive internet and also cheap technology in terms of mobile phones, and also the financial and the digital literacy that the governments are basically providing to these women. So technology is playing a very, very crucial role when it comes to these different groups and, trying to break occupational stereotypes as well. The program that I just discussed about, the Drone Sisters program, is also very, 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 very fascinating with respect to sort of breaking the occupational stereotypes. Because when I started studying, I mean, if I can go a little bit into detail, I started studying the cotton economy of the state of Maharashtra in India, where farmers are growing cotton. And there I saw that the you know the occupations were very, very gendered in terms of men were basically involved in spraying pesticides or, using fertilizers. With the Drone Sisters program throughout the country, now what has happened is that these women have been trained in drone technology and they are using these drones for precision agriculture, for natural farming, and also for spraying fertilizers, nano insecticides or pesticides. So this is very modern. When we talk about precision agriculture, it's a very, very modern agri technology. And drones are obviously, very, very technical. So again, coming together of livelihoods, agricultural causes and concerns, and of course technology. So this is how these groups are really adapting to different technological innovations that are happening and are very enthusiastic about getting trained in these modern ways to address these socioeconomic challenges as well.
What you've just described is kind of an interconnectedness between traditional heritage, right? Time-honored values, but also being techie and on top of entrepreneurial endeavors. Is there any kind of tension within there? How do people think about their traditional heritage amidst these entrepreneurial ventures that you've described?
Absolutely. They're trying to balance tradition and modernity all the time. Like we just discussed some of the examples in terms of, water hyacinth crafts or even that bamboo acoustics amplifier. It's really their traditional knowledge, their indigenous knowledge, natural heritage, and trying to sort of use those to cater to modern needs, to cater to a very, very urban audience whenever they travel to other parts of the country to sell their products. One of the examples that really fascinated me and really intrigues me, and I'm now working more and more on this, is this millet entrepreneurial venture, these millet entrepreneurial canteens and cafeterias, which these women are sort of, they are running, they're organizing. So if I were to really dig a little bit into the history of these millets have been these ancient grains, these have been indigenous grains to certain parts of the country. And also most of these millet recipes, like the finger millet and a lot of other kinds of millets, they've been these traditional grains, and most of these recipes have been a part of the staple diets of the rural poor. Now, India is an agriculturally dependent economy. Of course, the service sector is very, very, and we have the country is also working massively to kind of harness their manufacturing potential. But because agriculture is a very important, mainstay of the economy, what's happening is that because of climate vagaries and also because of the fact that because of the green revolution that happened in the 1960s that displaced these millets and brought wheat and rice into the diets of people, people forgot about using these millets. And for the last few years, there's been a lot of revival in terms of cultivating these millets, trying to kind of get these millet recipes in, student meal programs that are run in schools. Also, restaurants adapting to these, ancient grains and bringing indigenous cultures to their plates. What happened was also one of the boosts that happened internationally was also that the United Nations declared 2023 as the International Year of the Millets. So farmers increasingly realized that there is a lot of demand for these grains now, for their recipes. And interestingly, these women who were now, who were at one point not even a part of any kind of a formal agrarian, agricultural developmental program, they decided to cultivate these millets with governmental support and also come up with cafeterias and canteens. So across the country now, you'd see that these women are sort of getting together, making recipes, serving in restaurants, starting their own entrepreneurial ventures in restaurants, canteens and cafeterias, and also breaking the occupational stereotype like we discussed in Drone Sisters, even here. Because, running a restaurant, and of course, like we discussed, the challenges, the familial and the societal challenges most of these women face, the patriarchy that exists. Suddenly you see women running these canteens and cafeterias, which is very, very new. And also it tells you that how these women are breaking these stereotypes, how they're also fighting these barriers, these cultural barriers that have existed. So tradition and modernity are balanced here because these women are also conserving these seeds, the concept of seed sovereignty. They're really the ambassadors of that. And in like I was telling you about the G20 meetings and in a lot of international fora, many of these millet recipes are brought to a global audience. So again, keeping your heritage and your tradition alive while you're catering to a modern audience. So that's one example. The other examples are, of course, of artifacts and jewelry. These are traditional artifacts from the state of Madhya Pradesh, like I discussed. And I took these photos, by the way, in 2013, long ago. And you see that there are these modern designs, there are these artifacts that, so the face that you see, one of the pictures in the slide, the face of a doll that you see, these are the tribal dolls that are made in one of the districts in the state of Madhya Pradesh. And these dolls depict traditional living, and they're also used as very important cultural gifts whenever someone important is visiting that district. And of course they're very, very popular in the country. And the bead jewelry, of course, like you see, coming up with modern designs. And like you see, there's this artisanal teacup and saucer over there. There are other utensils. There are these choker necklaces and so on. The other example I want to give is that of the mahua flower, which is also now gaining global recognition. The first time I met some of these mahua farmers and people collecting mahua flowers was again in 2012 and 2013. And this flower basically blooms, and people go very, very early in the morning to collect them. It's one of the most important forest produce and is also supported actively by the government. Till several years ago, I couldn't imagine these self-help groups come together to kind of make some, formal product with it. They were using these flowers for their indigenous recipes and other indigenous applications that they have. But today, you can see that there are processed items made out of these mawa flowers, and villagers and self-help group members are actively trained. So the graphics that you see on the slide, basically, how are they really preserving tradition while also being, very, very modern in their appeal by making products like body butter, soaps, and whatnot, is by doing advocacy by using these indigenous paintings that you see on the slide. So here you see there's a mahua tree, and there are these women collecting the mahua flowers. They're making something with it. And really, what they've done is they've used product packaging as an important instrument to advocate for the rights of these people, for what is it that they do, how is it that they say tribal wisdom is rooted in nature. So they are also trying to communicate, and this is, I think, also in resonance with something which is called in public policy space as communications for development, or the C4D methodology, which is basically you're communicating for rural development, right? You're communicating for advocacy. So this I found very, very unique because, like your audience also polled just now, our audience also polled just now, that having the right training in marketing, product packaging is one of the challenges, and that has come in my research as well. And I believe this is a very, very innovative way to kind of, educate modern audiences or people living in the cities who have no idea what mawa flower is all about. It's a very important and a very creative way to just communicate about ancient wisdom, ancient practices. What is it that women do with mawa flowers? How is it that they collect through indigenous paintings? And it also takes care of the, lack and the need of attractive packaging, because this looks very, very attractive at the end of the day. So these are some of the ways how these self-help groups balance modernity, tradition, heritage, sustainability, economy.
Those are beautiful examples. So where I want to take the conversation next, let's start to kind of zoom out a little bit, right? Yeah, I've heard you allude to it through the conversation, whether it's canteens, cafeterias, government support, et cetera. What seems essential, and what you told me in our pregame huddle, was that community partnerships are the bedrock upon which a lot of
Yes.
this depends, these endeavors, success or failure. Tell me a little bit about how those are taking shape, what they look like.
Yes, so like I said, that the fact that these women come together, or these groups come together, the fact that they've come together, they're self-driven, they're trying to deliver development, they're trying to cater to the needs of the society, uh, makes them very, very trusted community resource persons, trusted barefoot grassroots soldiers, right? So, which is why what happens in such a scenario is that the trust increases. And like I mentioned in the initial slides, there's something called organic solidarity, which you develop while you're working in groups, closely, tightly knit networks. And this really makes you very, very, approachable by multilateral organizations, for example, by governments, because there's already an established network on the ground. So each time the government decides there needs to be this public policy program, they approach these groups. Why? Because they are important grassroots soldiers. They understand the local context. They understand the cultural context. They are more rooted in their community, so their community presence is stronger. They know people living in and around, so the approachability is obviously higher in with vis-a-vis an outsider coming and trying to sort of educate people on something. So the community building is happening on a daily basis, on a constant basis, because of these factors. The other important thing that makes this model very successful is the fact that there are regular meetings that happen of these groups. Now, with regular meetings, what happens is that there's a peer pressure that builds up, and obviously, you're doing something economic, you're trying to diversify your income. So, that also plays an important role. And and each time there's a successful venture, successful enterprise that sort of blooms out of the collective effort of these groups, it also plays as an important multiplier. It also has its own demonstration effect. So, the fact that some of these groups also work constantly to address concerns in public policy as advocacy groups, they also sometimes emerge as important pressure groups. Sometimes there's some problem, they can rise to the occasion, and they can rise to that challenge and sort of advocate for their rights. In a lot of examples, like I was discussing with you initially, if we were to go a little, and because of time constraints, of course, I don't have too much bandwidth to go into the detail, but a lot of these groups have been utilized by local district administrations to also bring down gender-based violence, to also sort of advocate for the reproductive rights and so on, to advocate for rights of women and so on. And it's, of course, I mean, research says that economic empowerment of women precedes all other kinds of empowerment. And of course, every empowerment, is important, social, psychological, political, but most of these activities are targeted at first economically empowering women, making sure that they get incomes. And that sort of acts as a very, very important sort of, glue that sticks these women together, brings them together each time there's something happening.
I want to ask you, so can you further elaborate on like how the grassroots level organizing can influence public policy, like governance, in a real material way? What does this look like?
Yes. So, like I said, that these groups are very important grassroots soldiers, right? They're important networks at the community level. And each time a multilateral organization wants to do something, each time there's a collaboration between local government and an organization, a private sector organization, or a civil society organization, these groups are possibly approached first, because it's already a formal structure that exists. And of course, then the more beneficiaries sort of come under the ambit of anything. So the structure of the governance that most of these organizations are trying to kind of deliver is very decentralized. It's very, very bottom up. Like we were discussing about several initiatives, I can say that they have played a very important role in public policy delivery, and also in the delivery of developmental targets. Some of these groups have also catered to the last mile public policy outreach needs, and they have served as important doorstep public policy, facilitators. Some of these examples are there. I've used local terms and I've also translated them. friends of agriculture, friends of nutrition, bank correspondents, like we discussed when we were discussing the role of technology in sort of assisting and upskilling these women. And of course, animal health workers. Now, these are all very important rural developmental targets, right? So you've got friends of nutrition that take care, of nutritional needs of a community, reproductive rights of women, maternal and child health care. I would also like to say that one of the most important last mile delivery facilitators are also the ASHA workers and the Anganwadi workers. These are community health workers, not necessarily members of any self-help groups, but definitely influencing self-help groups over there. But since we are discussing grassroots resilience, it's very important to mention about the grassroots community health workers that exist outside of these important self-help groups as well. So, friends of nutrition, you've got the animal health workers that sort of cater to the livestock rearing needs, where women are increasingly participating. I would like to say that there's a project in the state of Jharkhand that's supported by the World Bank, and also one of the projects has been supported by the Aga Khan Foundation. They work on rearing goats. Goats are very important assets to the rural poor. Livestock is an extremely important asset to the rural poor. And in one of the articles that I was reading, said that goats are actually the ATMs of the rural poor. And as somebody who's worked on issues of land and agriculture and access of land to farm widows and women in agriculture, I've understood that after land, that is one of the most important one of the most important determinants of rural poverty. Livestock is another important asset to the rural poor. So, you've got these groups of women working on catering to the needs of livestock rearing, addressing, any animal health concerns that exist in the community. You've got friends of agriculture that are doing natural farming and sustainable agriculture. And of course, other things, working on agroecology and sustainability and so on. And of course, you've got friends of nutrition. I think while discussing the Drone Sisters program, I mentioned that these women are addressing natural farming. I think I made a mistake there. That was precision agriculture, is what I'm saying. And in case Drone Sisters are doing any contributions to agroecology, that's also great. But it's really the friends, the support groups of women in agriculture that are working on agroecological farming and so on. So these are some of the photos that you see. One of the photos where you see a woman addressing to other women in terms of some banking transactions. There's another woman that's vaccinating a goat over there. And of course, some of these women, like a woman that you see, she's measuring the sort of shoulder, whatever, dimensions of another woman. So really addressing to the community health concerns. So basically, when we discuss these self-help groups trying to deliver to public policy needs, we are discussing, the human capital potential of these groups. One of the things that I want to show you is this photo where this really organized structure of which is also, touted as one of the largest self-help groups in the country with over 4.5 million members, Kudumbashri, or meaning prosperity of the family, from the state of Kerala, organized these floating markets during COVID-19 to deliver essential goods and services to the rural poor, to the poor communities. And these boats would navigate the backwaters of the coastal state of Kerala. Another example that I came across was the floods that that caused some damage to certain parts of the state in 2018, where these women sort of came together from Kudumbashri and counseled over 8,000 families, and also contributed financially to the disaster management and mitigating efforts of the state government. So really, I mean, wherever you go, you see that most of these women address public policy concerns and deliver development.
How might self-help groups how do they measure their impact, right? In order to influence policy, right? Presumably you've got to run around with some metrics. So maybe
Yes.
measuring economic success or social change or material benefit. How does that handled?
Like I said, self-monitoring and peer pressure. The fact that these women are very, very self-driven. The fact that, they are digitally, financially equipped now. And one of the things that I want to say is that the report that I was reading from 2020 to 2023, it said that over 96% of these, I mean, basically, there's no default, basically. Around 96% of the loans that these women take are always repaid. So that's a very, very high rate of recovery there. In terms of the socio-economic impact of how do they assess their own progress, I would say that obviously if you're earning more income, that's an indicator. If you're becoming more self-reliant, if there's an increase in your self-esteem and self-worth, that's also an indicator. But most importantly, how much additional are you spending on children's education? How much additional are you spending on the health and nutrition needs of your family? How much additional are you spending on nutritional needs of your own self, right? And of course, the scale of these entrepreneurial ventures going up, right? If there is more replication, if there's more demonstration effect, then of course it's successful. And most of these women engage in thorough record keeping and bookkeeping. So they have tracks of what, they keep a track of what's really succeeding and what's not. Something that I wrote about in 2023 was that, when I was studying these groups in detail, it was basically this, that the real impact of change that these self-help groups have contributed to the society can only be measured holistically when you've got these women politically empowered. And with political empowerment, I mean representation of these women in politics. And that is obviously changing with time. You've got the example of the coastal state of Odisha, where women are SHG members are increasingly fighting elections at the local level, and of course from other parts of the country as well. Why are they, important? How can they make important political leaders? Because they understand grassroots needs and concerns. They understand the cultural contexts. They understand the local contexts. Eventual empowerment will happen when these women are represented politically, I would say. And of course, there are these other indicators, like because of advocacy efforts, the incidence of gender-based violence going down, other kind of substance abuse going down, and so on. And also the fact that many political parties are now including the concerns of these self-help groups in their political manifestos.
So I'm thinking about our audience a little bit. Did you, leadership is naturally and obviously a big quality here that gets things done. Were there any unexpected leadership lessons that can be applied to, what we have observed is largely a domestic audience, right? So
Yeah.
any takeaways for those of us who are doing work, not necessarily in rural India?
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, that most of these groups, I was telling you about, the time when we were conversing earlier, that there was this SHG model in the state of Rajasthan where they trained around 12,500 women from West African countries. So there's a lot of cultural exchange, and these lessons are increasingly applicable to different contexts also, because at the end of the day, these are life lessons, right? If you were to say unexpected leadership lessons, definitely integrating sustainability and circular economy principles on a day-to-day basis. Rural poor are the best entrepreneurs, like I say all the time, because they're constantly working in constrained environments, but they're also utilizing principles of sustainability and ecology in their day-to-day basis. Today, we all know no business can exist without having sustainability at its core. You've got ESG dominating, corporations, and there are job vacancies in that respect, and so on. So definitely sustainability at its core, because the world is one family, like we say, and working on environment becomes a very, very important business agenda for everybody, for governments, for private sector, for civil society. Conserving biodiversity through these groups, the products that they make all the time. How do they conserve their tangible and intangible heritage? How do they balance modernity and tradition, like we discussed? And of course, things like persisting in the wake of any adversity. We discussed the example of COVID-19, when they all of them got together to kind of address to the public health emergency that was there in terms of making the essential supplies of herbal sanitizers or face masks and whatnot. So persisting, resilience, the ability to continuously innovate, reimagine, reinvent how best to use these natural resources to cater to a modern audience and so on. I would say the innate drive to upskill themselves all the time. That is also something that is probably applicable to all of us, trying to do something in life. How do you persist? How are you resilient? How do you endure? How do you keep going? How do you coexist amid, hope and despair? I would say that's something that I learned deeply through these experiences.
You had mentioned through in there about sustainability goals. There's obviously some global aspirations and endeavors and particular programs
Yeah.
related to sustainable development goals. How does it figure into the picture you've just described?
Absolutely. So in 2015, there were these 17 SDGs that were envisaged, and global governments are working to address them to kind of, make sure that social developmental targets, and every SDG has their own, target. So I'll just quickly tell you, and I also urge all the students to always have this in their mind each time they're looking at a public policy concern. So, for example, if some self-help group is making an ecological handicraft, right? They're trying to balance ecology, sustainability, economy, livelihoods, all of that. They're contributing to Sustainable Development Goal number 8, which is on decent work, right? They're also contributing to Sustainable Development Goal number 13, that is on climate action. Some self-help group that's working on, say, clean energy. There are several groups that work on solar energy, right? They're contributing to Sustainable Development Goal number 7, that is basically targeting clean energy and so on. Responsible consumption and production. We are talking about circular economy all the time, reducing inequalities. Each time we're discussing any example of a woman self-help group, we are talking Sustainable Development Goal number 5, that is gender equality. So this is how you sort of try to understand in a macro perspective how these self-help groups are contributing to different targets of Sustainable Development Goals. And I urge, if there are students who have joined, try to remember these Sustainable Development Goals, link them, understand them holistically, always think multidimensional when it comes to this.
Very good. I want to ask you, so when I'm thinking about women-led entrepreneurial ventures, what are some things that they do directly to contribute to the long-term viability of their business, the
Yeah.
sustainability of their particular business? Any strategies for that? What have you seen there?
Largely the governmental support that comes, the collaborative partnerships with multilateral organizations, private sector organization, the fact that these are very important grassroots networks. Um, I would say it's really very, very, these ventures are very self-driven. The fact that there's constant government support, because we are really discussing scarce economies here. We are discussing agricultural societies where there's lack of capital, there's lack of finance and credit. So constant government support becomes a very important factor. But beyond that, it is their own self-determination, their own zeal to go forward, the fact that they want to economically empower themselves, the fact that there's, all of them come together and there's collective action on the ground. I would say that contributes to their sustained longevity. In addition to that, I would say their zeal to kind of upskill themselves all the time, to learn new things, innovate, to take up on the challenges as to whatever the society is in, and also catering to an urban audience. So largely related to their own aspirations and ambitions.
So what are some challenges that self-help groups face? What's most urgent? What's around the corner? What are we dealing with now?
Right. So our audience already answered some of this, so I'm very happy. So yes, definitely. So marketing skills, sometimes lack of adequate capital and credit. We are discussing difficult geographies, difficult terrains. Sometimes also, the fact that there's migration, there's the fact that there's aspiration to move to other parts of the country. So the occupational legacy of some of these, occupations, for example, in handlooms and arts, that sort of lags behind. Um, and definitely, sometimes I would say the mobility challenges to women. But I would say that this is slowly changing. I've seen it change over the last many, many years. And I have seen women travel from all across the country to different capitals of the country, just to showcase their products and entrepreneurial ambitions. and the ability to participate in training programs. I would say there are challenges, but I would also say that they are slowly and slowly fading away.
I have a really good question from viewer Karina who asks, women-owned businesses are still trying to break ground in the US, but we have exposure to government grants. Relatively recently, US history, women just started getting loans and credit, which were before then, prevented all the way up until the 70s. Here, women are not aware of the money that's available to them. Do the self-help groups help with this information or pursuing those?
Yes.
In India, how does that work?
Yes, because there's a decentralized system of governance there. So whatever grant they can, they have available, or for that, there's a very, very structured bank linkage program that's there. So women are aware as to how much loan can they get, how much money can they borrow. And of course, the other technical aspects. So like I said, governmental training plays a very important role in the success of these programs. So yes, they are aware of what is it that they can borrow, and which is why you would see that the default rate is very, very low. So I would say that large awareness and the ability to participate, and also I think just to understand what a governmental program looks like for them as beneficiaries is very important.
Swasti Pachauri, I want to thank you for joining us today.
Okay.
It's been an absolute lovely pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. This is great. There's more, audience. You can check out Swasti's writing and work in the online edition of the Indian Express and also Down to Earth magazine. So we're going to share a couple URLs. A lot of the themes and learnings that we've touched on today, you can find in some of those publications as well. And I should just give you a little tip. Cornell Keynotes is also a podcast. So for those of you who haven't listened, you can check us out on Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to your podcasts as well. And this one will presumably be a podcast in the weeks to come. Again, Swasti Pachauri, lovely to have you on Cornell Keynotes today. Lucky us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Christopher and team. Thanks, everybody. And thanks to the audience for joining in.
Thank you, audience. Thank you, Karina, for that great question. We'll see you next time on Cornell Keynotes. Thank you.